All right, what is going on, everybody? I hope you're all doing well. Today we are checking out, hey, look at that, it's an amplifier. This one is the new Revv Amps D25 Joey Landreth edition. If you're not familiar with Mr. Joey Landreth, look that dude up. He is, in my humble opinion, a musician's musician. The guy just drips music. He's an insane slide player. Crazy good vocalist, great songwriter. Just all the threats have been achieved masterfully by Mr. Landreth. So definitely check him out. Like I said, fabulous guitar player. This amp is based on the original D25, but with some refinements that Joey and the main builder at Revv, Dan Trudeau, worked out on the amp. So it's a 25 watt amp. 6v6 power section, pretty straight ahead tone stack, and we'll get into all of that. The difference between the original D25 and the new D25 is kind of tweaks within the circuit. This amp has maybe a little bit tighter low end, and to some degree just a little bit less low end, which makes sense because Joey's been known, and not been known, does play drop C most of the time. So you're going to need a tighter low end, especially if you're tracking and things like that, or as you start cranking the volume, you want the amp to stay together. That's one thing that's changed. The top end is brighter to my ears. You guys that are D25 fans or own one, let me know what you heard, but the top end is definitely a little bit brighter. The mid sweep is a little bit different. We'll check that out as well. It sounds really great. It's super chimey, really expressive, just like the old D25, or I should say original D25. But like I said, with those tonal enhancements. And then on top of that, Joey's a big fan of a creamback. So it has the G75 in it, the G12H. It's running at 8 ohms. It's a little more spread out low end. The mids are a little bit different. It's not quite as forward in the mids. Top end is actually, to my ears, a little bit more spread out. So that was put in there as opposed to a V30. Definitely fits Joey's thing. What's on the front of the amp? Like I said, straight ahead tone stacks. You've got gain, treble, middle, bass, volume, and reverb. The reverb is digital, but it sounds really good. We will check that out. You've got 4 switches across the front of the amp. You have a gain boost switch. I'll definitely let you guys hear that. I love that. It's one of my favorite features on the D-Series amps. Next to that is a pre-post switch. We won't be getting into that because that's more based on what comes pretty much with every Revv amp now is the 2 notes embedded hardware and software. I've demoed the original D25 with all of that stuff. It sounds great, but because this one had a speaker change in it and had so much tweak to the circuit, I wanted you guys just to hear it on the speaker. But what this does is it allows you to bypass, when you're running direct to load, you can bypass the amp and use the amp modeling within the 2 notes software, which is really cool. But that's what that's doing. We have a 25 down to 5 watt switch. We'll check that out. It works great. And then of course the speaker load lets you bypass the speaker, go straight to the reactive load so that you can run direct into the computer, I should say your DAW or your interface or front of house, whatever it is you might be doing. It sounds great. Comes loaded with 6 cabinets preloaded that all sound great, from like a 1x12 all the way to a 4x12. All that stuff sounds fab. But like I said, I just want you guys to hear this thing on the mics. On the back of the amp, you obviously have your foot switch. The foot switch turns on the reverb and the gain. Right next to that is your direct XLR out for using the embedded software. You have a ground lift. You've got your bias test points, which are great, so you don't have to take everything apart to actually change the tubes and bias them in. You've got MIDI in, which is great. You've got a cabinet light if you want to use that. So if you're putting this on top of another cab, you can actually run a cable to it that's a Revv cab and light up the badge, which is pretty cool. It has an effects loop. We won't get into that for this demo, but the effects loop is important. If you're going to run the amp hotter, or if you just want your effects to sound a little bit slicker, like delays, modulation, any time-based stuff, you can run that 4-cable method kind of deal, and it sounds really good. Next to that is your extension. So if you want to run an extension cab, you can. And then, of course, your speaker out with a switch that allows you to choose between 8 and 4 ohm. Let's get into how this amp sounds. It is the Revv D25 Joey Landreth Edition. Okay, let's check this thing out. I've got it mic'd up with a Royer 122 Mark II ribbon mic and a Shure SM57. I've got the ribbon mic turned down quite a bit, so you're hearing quite a bit more 57 than Royer, but that's a tried and true combination, and that's what I always use when I demo amplifiers. So yeah, here's the guitar without the amp. Sounds kind of bland. Here's the guitar with the amp. Okay, so just goofing around a little bit. Where I started, honestly, is how I like to use the amp. So I had the gain boost on, obviously the reverb's on, and I just kind of turned things up and down. And I'll apologize for that little crackle in advance. I got to replace this this volume control. Every once in a while, it's just going to throw a fit, but the show must go on. So that's kind of how I dial it. I certainly used pedals for the solo tones and even the rhythm tones, so we'll get into that. But let's just look at the controls. I'm going to go ahead and shut that gain boost off, even though that is, you know, for me, I would never shut it off. But there's reasons you might. So nobody come at me about that. I'm not saying that's what you should do, kids. Okay, with the gain off, it's just a really sweet pedal platform. Now the way this gain control works is I always say it's a tone control too. So if you run the gain, like I would say from 12 o'clock counterclockwise and run the volume hotter, in this case the master volume, the amp is brighter. Less lows. But if we go the other way and we start turning up, and then compensating with the master, now we're getting more lows. So just between those two parameters, master volume and gain, you're controlling the tone of this amp. So that's how that's working. This amp, you know, obviously we're on close mics. This amp, I would say, approaches to maybe slightly above, depending on how you dial it, like a Fender Deluxe. It's the size of a Princeton, which is great. So volume-wise, obviously, it's going to be hard for you guys to get a perspective of how loud it is in the room, but it'll crank, it'll honk on most small stages, no problem, club stages, things like that. So we've covered the gain control and the volume. Now, if you dime the gain, it's not going to get super broken up or overdriven. You can turn up the volume. Let me make sure I don't kill my preamp. And it'll break up a little more. But it'll stay relatively clean. And once again, that's great because, like I said, that becomes a tone control without creating overdrive if you're not wanting that. Now, if you're wanting a little more overdrive, that's when you hit the gain boost. I won't say it creates overdrive. It creates, you know, gain. And you can hear right away there's a volume boost. But you hear all that. Everything kind of spreads out. It becomes a little bit more toppy, so you can compensate if you want with the treble. That gives you another parameter to tweak within the top end of the amp. So now there's a little bit of breakup there. But it just, to me, it's a little more expressive and dynamic. Now you can do the same trick, turn the volume up, gain down. So now it's got more headroom. And like I said, I personally would just leave it set that way. If you turn the gain all the way up, it's not going to be a ton of overdrive. You can start cranking volume, but you know, and as you crank volume, you'll want to turn down the bass. We can hit it a little bit harder. I mean, we can dime the volume, but it's really, then you'll get into power amp breakup, which is cool, but you know, it's not going to be like a ton of gain. You can dime the mids, and we'll get into that, but it doesn't create like as much gain as you would think by diming the mids on this amp. So, okay, we've covered what's going on with just the parameters of using the gain volume, that gain boost. I'm going to shut the gain boost back off and just listen to the treble. So pretty broad sweep, definitely gets glassy if you as you keep cranking it. You know, it's interactive with the low end. Sorry about that volume pot. So that's what's going on there. Here's mids off. Mids all the way up. to me, that's a more subtle mid. It sounds good, but like I said, it doesn't necessarily create gain. It doesn't have a lot of bark to it. And then last but not least, bass. So this amp presents with less low end than the original D25, and it makes sense. It's going to be a tighter low end because, you know, Joey Landreth is known for playing guitars that are drop C instruments or even baritones, and it needs to be tighter. So this won't present with as much low end as, say, the original, but it'll stay together at higher volumes possibly than the original, especially if you're hitting it with overdrive pedals and whatnot. But that's what's going on with that reverb, which has been on this whole time, which I probably should have shut off. Sorry about that. Here's the reverb off. I love reverb. Reverb sounds great. As you get around 12 o'clock, there's definitely like a pre-delay thing happening. And then, of course, if you dime it, you can hear that kind of tail. I would say it's kind of a little bit shorter than maybe a medium. But it's a good sounding reverb. And anything you heard reverb on that performance was definitely the amp. I did do delays in post because I didn't want to make the mistake of having them too hot. I'm a big chicken about that stuff. Okay, so everything else on the front of the amp is pretty self-explanatory. We've done the gain switch. Pre-post doesn't matter in this case. That's if we're running it direct. You can bypass the power amp and use the modeling in the two notes, which is very cool. That's what that's doing. We can knock this down to, like if I'm, say, with this kind of tone, we can knock it down to 5 watts. Sounds pretty cool. And then, of course, the speaker load. You can bypass the speaker when you don't want to hear me play anymore. But no, you bypass the speaker that goes to the internal load for running direct. So that's handy. Output level and virtual cabinets obviously are based on the direct outs as well. Last thing I want to do is just hit this thing with an overdrive. And what I'm using is just the Shanks ODS. I also used a fuzz pedal for one of the solos, but just so you can hear how it takes a pedal. And I've got it dialed pretty clean. takes pedals really well. Honestly, all the Revv D series amps especially take pedals rather nicely. They just pretty much become a part of the amp. It never makes me mad when I turn a pedal on with this thing. So that is the Revv Amps D25 Joey Landreth edition. If you've got any other questions about it, go to the site and check things out. And as always, I really appreciate you guys watching, and I will see you on the next one.